a researcher from the Institute of Security Studies. Dr. Zounmenou, thank you so much for your time and good afternoon to you. Now, the members of Burkina Faso's Presidential Guard vowed to organize inclusive elections. But what does this mean for the political stability of the country?
I think the issue at hand here is not about them holding the election, because everything is planned for the election to take place in the next 3 weeks or to come. The electoral campaign was supposed to start on Saturday. So I think there is no impediment whatsoever for the holding of the elections in that country. But I think the main reason that they are not really putting forward is that they intervene to stop the transition in order to preserve their own interests, which is refuse or show resistance to the reform that will weaken the power of the presidential guards that has been the backbone of the political system in Burkina Faso for the past 30 years, but also to escape justice for some of the crimes that have been committed. So there's holding the election cannot be the justification for them to stage a coup.
Now, are these not the same troops that helped Isaac Zida topple President Blaise Campaore?
No, definitely. I think even though we have some reservation about the role that they play in toppling Blaise Campaore, the downfall of Campaore is essentially and exclusively the work of civil society organizations and members who had enough for Campaore's role, but also the moral attempt to hang on to power through fraudulent amendment of the constitutions. I think Burkina citizens and youth wanted a clear, genuine democratization process to take place in their country. They had enough of having one man ruling the country forever. That's why they took on the street, and you have the convergence of interest that helped them to succeed. But the military junta, particularly the presidential guards leader, Gilbert Diendere, took the opportunity to recuperate the process and understood as the one on the side of the citizen. So realistically speaking, I think the transition has made a great stride in trying to refine the political process in Burkina Faso and bring decency and morality at the head of political actions. Unfortunately, this coup came to compromise or to serve as an impediment to this vision that that motivate people to take up the street last year.
Now, Dr. Zounmenou, we do know that the now dissolved government of Prime Minister Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Zida, he was one that was responsible for overthrowing President Blaise Campaore. Could this signal the return of Campaore, or at least his party that had been barred from the polls?
No, it's difficult to say if Campaore will be reinstated as a president. But one thing that is for sure is that the military element, particularly the presidential guard, want to remain the most powerful power center in the country. Exactly like what we are seeing in Guinea-Bissau, where the military dictates where the country goes and how the political process in the country is managed. The difference in Burkina Faso is that you also have other units of the army that are completely against this hegemonic status of a presidential guard and accept that the transitional government do anything or take any action that is possible to weaken them, to reduce their capacity to disrupt the democratization process. So, but also we can also count on international pressure to help them understand that they don't have any role to play in the political process, and they have to stay in the barrack and allow the transition to be completed.
Now, speaking of that international pressure, let's just take a look at the AU's perspective for a moment. We do know that the African Union had threatened Burkina Faso of sanctions unless power was handed over to civilians. And an agreement was reached on a transitional period, therefore, of course, that in the run-up, of course, to elections which were due in November. Now, how do you anticipate that the African Union will respond to all of this?
I think normatively, the African Union is entitled to raise its voice, and the Continental Organization has been very clear in its early message, having issued the joint communique with the Economic Community, West African State, and the United Nations to call upon the military junta to allow the transition to be completed, and they also reject completely the decision to dissolve the government, the parliament, and other government institutions, and refuse to accept, to acknowledge this coup d'etat. if the military junta does not heed the call, and that's an element from the African Union, probably you have the African Union, ECOWAS, the UN, the EU really decide on a sanction to impose on them. I think what's going to happen here is to force a military junta to relinquish control of power and to reinstate the government, to allow the transition, which has some few amount to go to be completed, and for Burkina Faso to have an elected and legitimate government to decide about the future of the army later on.
Dr. Zounmenou, thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, that's all the time I had for you, but thank you so much for your valued contribution to this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.